Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to our lecture series, Scholarly Writing for Publication. And this is now lecture 9. As I promised, in lecture 8, we started the phases of theory building, and we did discuss conceptualization at that material time. Given the time that we had, we are unable to complete our lecture, ladies and gentlemen. So I did present a part up to a section that I called specific theorizing tools. And I told you that in lecture 9, we shall start at that level of theorizing tools. But just remind you, ladies and gentlemen, in our lecture 8, I did give you figure 1, and figure 1, let me put it back on the screen here so that you really do understand exactly where we are and how we are supposed to take off. Now, in the phases of theory building, ladies and gentlemen, you recall I told you this is a cyclical process, as you see it on the screen, cyclical process. And the cyclical process begins with the conceptualization phase, if you remember. From the conceptualization phase, you go to the operationalization level, or operationalize phase. From operationalize, we go to confirm phase. Confirm phase, you must confirm the theory. And then after that, you go to the application step level, which is apply phase. And then, of course, later on, you get into details of refining the theories or the theory that you have developed. At this material time, ladies and gentlemen, I think you do appreciate the job of theorists, what they are engaged in, that intellectual discourse and that intellectual process that results into the creation of knowledge. And it's not a very simple thing, as you can see, but not difficult either. It is something that can be done anyway. So as you can see, in lecture 9, this is a continuation of lecture 8, and we are still at the first level, the conceptualization level. Ladies and gentlemen, since we are dealing with tools, specific tools of theorizing, and these are specific theorizing tools, actually when you go through literature, 26 tools for generating ideas and generating the theory building effort have been identified, ladies and gentlemen. And I'll present this in the table here that you see, ladies and gentlemen. So these are the tools. Now, as you can see in these tools, ladies and gentlemen, the first tool that we have is to analyze your own experiences, right? Before you start theorizing, before you start the process, you have experiences, the experiences with the reality out there. And the objective is, the objective of analyzing your own experiences is to examine anomalies or particularly interesting cases for theory opportunities, ladies and gentlemen. So that's one of the tools that you go through. Analyze your own experiences. The second tool, ladies and gentlemen, is to use case studies. Case studies, and these are very important. So you need to examine cases for theory opportunities. So the objective here is to create a theory, but you want to see whether there are opportunities out there that you can take advantage of and be able to come up with a theory. So use case studies. And of course, ladies and gentlemen, the third tool you can use is to collect the practitioner's rule of thumb. So the practitioner's rules of thumb is very important because you are able to understand the challenges that the practitioners face, and the practitioners have extensive experience and knowledge of a particular topic, but from a practical standpoint. So that's why you need to go out, document reality, and you pick this information from the practitioners, or you pick it from out there through observation, through interrogation, and whatever it is. Now, the other tool you could use is role-playing, ladies and gentlemen. Attempt to change your perspective and assumptions about the problem and assumptions about reality, and of course conduct, you can actually go through another level of conducting an experiment, a thought experiment. And of course, here you'll be able to change a number of variables and, of course, consider an existing study, ladies and gentlemen. So another tool that you can use is to engage in what we call participant observation. So attempt to see participant views and perceptions that may differ from your own, ladies and gentlemen. Another tool that you can use is to analyze paradoxical incidents, right? And of course, these ones almost always reconcile somewhere between extreme, and of course, you may have to consider the middle point or middle ground, ladies and gentlemen. So these are tools, what we call specific theorizing tools, and they are at your disposal, ladies and gentlemen. But you can also use, you can engage in imaging, you can use analogies and metaphors. Ladies and gentlemen, you know, in the interest of time, I may not be able to go through everything, but you can also reframe the problem. Ladies and gentlemen, you can also apply deviant case analysis. You can change the scale. You can focus on processes or focus. I'm sure you see the diagram here on the board and the various aspects that are contained in there. So during your free time, you can actually look at all these things. But you can also make opposite assumptions. You can also use questioning, ladies and gentlemen. You can interrogate the existing knowledge with a view of, you can use the Socratic methodology of interrogating the theories, interrogating the models, the diagrams, and you'll be able to generate probably other aspects. You can consider your grandmother and prove her wrong in this case. So the aspects that you deal with at this material time is to try and use real-life experiences out there and try to interrogate those kinds. You engage in a discourse, right? All these things, including shifting the units of analysis, shifting the level of analysis, right? Using both explanations, capitalizing on methodological and technological innovations, whatever it is. So, ladies and gentlemen, all these things that you see in the diagram that I have presented there can help us at least theorize or conceptualize. So these, ladies and gentlemen, are specific theorizing tools which are very important. And of course, most of these tools, as you may have seen, make an assumption that the theorist is starting from scratch. So as you can see, these things which are presented in the table here are very important. Those tools are very important, and therefore they need to be interrogated. So most of the tools are self-explanatory, but for further detail, you can actually see Jacquard and Jacob 2009. The tools are obviously useful in provoking ideas and deciding on a starting direction for theorizing. So most theorists have something in mind or use some of the tools without making them explicit, ladies and gentlemen. So these tools are obviously useful, ladies and gentlemen, in provoking ideas and deciding on a starting direction for theorizing. And most theorists have something in mind or use some of the tools without making it explicit, ladies and gentlemen. So let me now take you to another level of where we discuss summary of the existing conceptual development methods, ladies and gentlemen. So as I have already said, this lecture has briefly presented the conceptual development methods and the 26 tools for starting the theory building process. And we know very well that literature has been written about how to integrate various approaches to conceptual development work. And a core purpose of this lecture then is to bring these disparate views and approaches together in building a general method for theory building in applied sciences. So let's try now to describe a framework that integrates a variety of processes, a variety of tools and approaches for working through the conceptualized phase. And this is now, ladies and gentlemen, our figure 3. So figure 3 attempts to integrate a variety of processes. Figure 3, as you see it on the screen here, attempts to integrate a variety of tools. Figure 3 attempts to integrate approaches, a variety of approaches for working through conceptualized phase. As you can see in this project here, ladies and gentlemen, you have, for instance, resources and the resource providers. You have government, you have the economy, we have the society, ladies and gentlemen, we have capital, we have equity, and we've got the strategy, leadership, and so forth. All these are very important. Without really going into details, that diagram presents tools for starting a theory building project. The conceptualized phase of theory building. This section, as I said earlier on, presents the conceptualized phase of theory building in applied disciplines. And the approach is general enough to accommodate the different philosophical orientations, and they include a variety of tools, and it is built on a process that makes it useful and applicable, ladies and gentlemen. So we see here that the core steps in the conceptualized phase are: 1, identify the concepts, 2, organize the concepts, 3, define the boundaries. And these have already been discussed, ladies and gentlemen, only that we just want to put these into perspectives in as far as the conceptualized phase is concerned, so that we link this lecture to the previous lecture, which was lecture 8. Certainly these two lectures do cover this aspect of conceptualized phase. Now, conceptual development, ladies and gentlemen, is not necessarily a linear process, as I've already said, and theorists jump around among the many steps that exist. And therefore, theorists will almost always use a variety of tools and approaches already described in this lecture. For example, a theorist might be confident in identifying the concepts, and of course these are concepts that we talked about in step 1, but when moving to organizing the concepts in step 2, she or may realize that an important concept is missing. So the process is very rigorous, and as you can see, that figure that is presented on the board here, and or probably on the screen, and that's what we are going to discuss in the next few minutes. So rigorous and effective theory building requires multiple rounds of each step. Therefore, this first step, ladies and gentlemen, is to define the concept, as you can see, and that is really from the diagram. You can see that step very well. Organize the concepts. And that's part of the conceptualization level. Define the concepts, organize the concepts, define the boundaries, and then outputs. So those are very important, and we are going to look at these aspects one by one. So you have the inputs, right, and then you have the outputs. So in theory building, the inputs and the outputs are very important. So the first step in the conceptualized phase is to identify and define the concepts involved in the theory building effort. And these are the smaller components that will make up the theory in some domain of human activity. So major concepts are generally identified through a combination of experience, written experiences of experts, research publications, practical problems, and therefore a thorough knowledge of the current status is required to identify a comprehensive group of concepts. So this is very important because the inputs certainly do tell us what kind of outputs that we are likely to have at the end of the day. But do not forget that whereas at the level of inputs you have practical problems, you've got incomplete existing theories, and you've got the new areas that require examination, the outputs will certainly be a model or concepts, or probably concepts that are linked in some kind of diagram. So you have conceptual maps and theoretical maps, ladies and gentlemen. So a thorough knowledge of the current status is required to identify a comprehensive group of concepts that you can use in theory building. So a theorist may bounce back and forth between reading the literature of what is known and building concepts multiple times before setting on a final group and moving forward. So let me just give you a very simple illustration of the point that I'm talking about. Imagine that you want to build a new house and you see pictures and drawings of your dream house. So you pay for that house and get ready to move in. All you end up with are the pictures and the drawings. What an incredible shock. So it is with the theory building. Theory building, right, which goes through the conceptualization. At this level of conceptualization, you are dealing with the images, right? You are dealing with the diagram, the pictures, the architectural designs of your building that you want to construct at the end of the day. So the conceptualization is just that. It's just images and not yet the real thing. So unfortunately, the bulk of the theory in applied disciplines, ladies and gentlemen, does not go beyond the attractive conceptualization, and eager advocates quickly start selling it as complete, even when it is actually incomplete. So this in no way, ladies and gentlemen, diminishes the importance of conceptualization. It is just that much more is needed in order to have a sound theory, ladies and gentlemen. So we need to do more of that, ladies and gentlemen. So again, just to take you back to the diagram that we have here on the board and linking up with the issues that we've been discussing. Yes, we talk about the conceptualized phase, which has the inputs, you have the defined concepts, you've got organizing the concepts, defining the boundaries, but the end results are diagrams. The end result is a model. The end result are actually concepts, boundaries, and so forth. So these are not the real thing. But let me just give you another example to illustrate this point. And the example is taken from the works of the best-selling book In Search of Excellence by Peters and Waterman, 1984. So this kind of book that you see, and again I want to invite you to read the book, was based on looking closely at successful companies. So they did a great job, right? They did a great job to determine what they were doing to be successful. In fact, they articulate that successful companies do this. They stay close to their customers and so forth. This is important to conceptualization. Again, this input that we see here, as you can see on our figure on the screen here, this is just an input. So the information you have in this book, ladies and gentlemen, is important. It's important input to conceptualization, and this could have been the basis for building a sound theory of company excellence. Instead, ladies and gentlemen, the conceptualization in this case, which is an incomplete theory, was turned into a best-selling book, and the majority of companies that were deemed successful were shortly found to be unsuccessful. So the only sure winners were Tom Peters and Bob Waterman, who are the book authors, ladies and gentlemen. So the big losers were most likely the companies that tried the idea in the book and ended up worse off than before they started. So writing on problem statements as thought trials and selection criteria is useful in this step of theory building. And many of the 26 tools that I demonstrated to you earlier, I will not put them back on the screen here because I know you still remember these things, right? So many of those 26 tools which were noted earlier, such as analyzing your own experiences, collecting practitioners' rules of thumb, are good starting points. And gathering up the building blocks and the important ideas that are relevant to theory in the first step in any theory building effort. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to move to the next component of what you see in the diagram here, organizing the concepts. And very soon, I should alert you that I will be closing, I will be ending this lecture, ladies and gentlemen. So we started with define the concepts, and now we go to organize the concepts. So once the concepts have been identified, they must be organized. right? And this means identifying and describing the relationships among the concepts. In other words, you're trying to relate these concepts. As you can see in the diagram here, you have already defined the concepts. You are organizing these concepts. So in the process of organizing, what are you coming up with? System diagrams. You are developing system diagrams. You are actually coming up with the sticky notes, right? You are coming up with the Witten's house as relationships, right? And of course, others that we have already articulated in this case. So once the concepts have been identified, they must be organized, right? And that means you must describe and identify relationship between these, or relationships between these concepts. And at this level, we have got some key questions that you can ask, right? A question like, is there a time element involved, right? Does one concept occur before or after another concept? How do the concepts influence each other? Are the relationships known, predictable, and linear? And of course, in this case, we know that Dubbin wrote a very detailed and specific discussion, ladies and gentlemen, of ways in which concepts can relate to each other. And that really comprised a useful tool in this step. And he called this the laws of interaction, ladies and gentlemen. So drawing from the works of Witten, using sticky notes to arrange concepts, ladies and gentlemen, in a system diagram is also a very helpful approach. And of course, experiment with a variety of tools. In your case, you will be able to arrive at a tool that you think is better. So I'm just inviting you to try and experiment with some of those tools that you have, and then see how these tools work. So when relationships, ladies and gentlemen, among the concepts become clear, a model begins to emerge. And one of the delicate things about theory building is that as the theorist continues to learn, and as the theorist, right, continues to learn the process, and ideas evolve and change, so does conceptual development work, right, ladies and gentlemen. So conceptual development goes into that. And of course, in this case, it is appropriate to revisit how the concepts are related again. Now, of course, I will not really go through the other diagram that I showed you for the enterprise, where we're looking at markets and looking at the resources and the rest of it, but I hope you still remember that. So eventually, theorists settle on understanding of models, right? Understandings or models that feel right, at least enough to move forward, and of course the phases are somehow reduced. So from organizing concepts, then you go to defining boundaries, ladies and gentlemen, and defining boundaries is really an important aspect, ladies and gentlemen. So why don't we move to the next level? As you can see in the diagram, and that level, which is step number 3, is define the boundaries. And ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, defining boundaries is the 3rd step in the conceptual phase of theory building. And this involves defining the domain in which the proposed explanation is expected to apply. And for example, approaches to team building in the United States may not be transferable to Uganda, to Korea, to Kenya, and of course to other countries, or even Japan, because of the cultural differences. So planning practices in large corporations, for example, may be different from those in small companies. So these are things and variations that you can be able to observe over time, and these do help you to define the boundaries of your theories, the boundaries of the theory that you are developing, and determining as to whether the theory will be local, mid-range, or grand theory, ladies and gentlemen. So boundaries locate the theory in the social world, ladies and gentlemen, and require an understanding of factors that prevent or limit the utility of the theory in other places. So the term boundaries seem most useful here, and that certainly mirrors Dubbin's work, ladies and gentlemen. So boundaries do just that. They bound the theory to a particular context. And the boundaries can be far and wide, or closed and confined. But in grand theories, you know, the boundaries are far and the boundaries are wide, right? And yet when you come to the local theory, the boundaries are closed and boundaries are confined. So the theorists had great freedom in setting the boundaries of the theory. And in this case, you have that freedom. So there is also a clear link between boundaries and the types of theories developed. For example, the wider the boundaries are set, the more the theory will approach a grand theory, bring them in closer, and you have a mid-range or probably local theory. Again, like the zoom lens on a camera, boundaries are critical to fleshing out details in the final scene of the theory. Now, in the realm of talking about organizations, people and productivity, there are quite varied views about the boundaries of performance management and performance improvement, for instance. And one is a psychological, the other one is educational view, and of course, which focuses on individual behavior. So you can't take an organizational perspective, you can't take the individual perspective, and of course, the other is the economic business view hinged on financials. So in this case, systems engineering, in contrast, targets, of course, process efficiency and so forth. Each of these has its own boundaries. When all the three are put together, ladies and gentlemen, boundaries expand, casting a wider net and more closely approaching a grand theory or performance improvement. So let's now look at the outputs of the conceptualized phase. And as I told you, I'm moving towards really closing, and the outputs you can see again from the diagram here. We started with the inputs, define concepts, organize the concepts, define the boundaries, and of course outputs, as you can see. So most scholars agree that the output of the conceptualized phase is a model or a set of linked concepts that explain, ladies and gentlemen, what we call a visual representation of the proposed explanation. And this is why system mapping is highly useful in conceptual development, ladies and gentlemen. So more specifically, as you can see, when the conceptual development phase is complete, right, the theorist should be confident that a comprehensive set of concepts have been identified. And of course, their relationships have been described and clarified. The boundaries of the merging model have been set. So its accuracy, as you can see, is yet to be examined and creates the need for the subsequent phases of theory building, ladies and gentlemen. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, I want to really move to, I want to move to the end. I actually want to close. And in a closing, I want to give you a summary of the steps that we have just discussed, which led to conceptualized phase of theory building. So ladies and gentlemen, as you can see, the conceptualized phase of theory building in applied disciplines is challenging. And this is really a challenging intellectual job or work. And motivation for starting conceptual development activity can come from a variety of places, and these are things we've just seen, including personal experiences, talking with the practitioners, and looking at existing research through literature review. And once established, the conceptualized phase requires identifying the concepts, organizing these concepts, and specifying the boundaries of the merging model. And all these are supposed to be put in some kind of organized chart or diagram that I've just taken you through. I'm sure that diagram is still on the board here, right? And you don't have any problem with it. The inputs define etc. Right, but we also know we have quality indicators for the conceptualized phase, and these are the ones given by Darby 1978, and these ones provide a clear set of quality indicators. And of course, these are summarized in form of what we call rigor and exactness in terms of parsimony, in terms of logical consistency. And each of these criteria certainly has been described. But I think for purposes of this lecture, although I'm ending the lecture, allow me to describe something about these aspects, which we call the quality indicators. Rigor and exactness, what do we mean? Parsimony, logical consistency, and so forth. So with rigor and exactness, we mean the rigor and exactness of the concepts of a theory, which refer to the kinds of concepts which are selected. So you must be very careful, you don't simply select any concept. And then concepts have variance, right? Those particular concepts that are observed to have variance are judged to be more exact than concepts that are simply present or not present. So in other words, concepts that will lead you to variable, to operationalization, and then you come up with a variable are very important. So as you can see, a theory involving happiness would potentially be highly exact, because the concept of happiness varies considerably, ladies and gentlemen. A person could be mildly happy, content, very happy, or laughing out loud, right? In terms of parsimony, parsimony in theory building refers to the fact that a minimum number of units is used to build the theory, right? Because we don't want you to crowd your model, your theory with 1,000 concepts. So parsimony, as you can see, can be assessed by looking at the concepts involved and considering their removal one by one. So the other aspect is logical consistency, and the choice, when we talk about logical consistency, the choice of concepts has immediate implications for the eventual testing or confirmation of a theory, ladies and gentlemen. And therefore, the choice of units must have logical basis in other theories, in other literature, and practice, ladies and gentlemen. So in terms of quality evaluation or assessment, those aspects that I've mentioned are very important. And of course, as you can see, according to Dublin 1978, parsimony is the single criteria for assessing the relationship among concepts. And parsimony is established by utilizing the minimum number of proposed relationships to connect all of the concepts in the theory. And of course, as you can see, while there is no fast rule for determining the appropriate number of relationships for any given theory, ladies and gentlemen, the same approach as with the concepts can be used. So it's very important for us to know these things here. We need to evaluate the boundaries, right? And the boundaries are evaluated in terms of generalization, right? How easy is it for us to generalize the findings using this particular theory, ladies and gentlemen? Again, that is something that Dublin talks about. Empirical testing is also very important. We must be able to test empirically and generate results. Of course, once we discover that some of the links do not work in these settings, then revisions of the theory certainly are talked about. And that's why we usually talk about implications for theory. So the empirical domain is very important. And just like the logically derived theoretical domain is confirmed as the empirical domain. So the theoretical domain is greater than the empirical domain, and these three things do tell us how we are supposed to conduct the testing bit of the theory. So, ladies and gentlemen, these are really very important issues, and these are quality indicators for the conceptualized phase. I do not intend to really go beyond this. Right, I know that Dublin has provided a very clear set of criteria for assessing progress in the early stages of the theory building, and these criteria are the only existing set of indicators, ladies and gentlemen, specific to conceptual development work, and they are logical. So theorists can apply these criteria to conceptual development work on a new theory or existing theories for improving them. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you very much for attending this lecture. I can only say thank you for attending. Stay well, stay safe. I wish you a nice time. Bye.